What's good? It's Woog. Please like and subscribe. Migos and Bone Thugs-N-Harmony. More specifically, Offset of Migos and Lazy Bone, the #1 assassin of Bone Thugs-N-Harmony. Offset mentioned Migos being the biggest group of all time, the biggest rap group of all time. Lil Lazy took to Instagram and said, slow down, there have been many before you. Bone is the greatest, biggest of all time. There have also been some others, NWA, who had Ice Cube, Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, Yella, MC Ren, Outkast, and then he named a couple of others, EPMD. Now this is part misunderstanding and part kind of apples and oranges. How are we going to determine the biggest group? Are we going to go by sales? Are we going to go by the longevity? Are we going to go by how big they were at the height of their popularity? Are we going to only look at money? Are we going to look at staying power and whether this group's songs have stood the test of time and if people are still listening to them and if you still hear it? So the misunderstanding is what Crazy Bone was alluding to when he came out on social media about a day after the spat, saying that there's a generational gap. Now, the generational gap is nothing new. In fact, when Bone Thugs were doing their thing, they hit big with Thuggish Ruggish Bone in '94, dropped their EP Creeping on a Come Up, followed up with East 1999 and '95, came out with the song Crossroads in '96. See, there was a song called Crossroad on East 1999 that was different from the #1 smash, The Crossroads, which they dropped a year later. Then they re-released East 1999 with that new Crossroads, replacing the old Crossroads song. And obviously, Crossroads took them to another level. Before that, Thuggish Ruggish Bone was a big song. For the Love of Money was a big song. First of the Month was a big song. But Crossroads put them over the top, gave them their first and only #1. Migos also has one #1 hit. Migos have been doing mixtapes, dropping them since 2011. They turned a corner in 2013 when they dropped Versace off of one of their mixtapes. Drake co-signed Versace, then featured on a remix of Versace. Now the public kind of knows about Migos and they've slowly gotten more and more famous over time, hitting a fever pitch with Bad and Bougie off their Culture 1 album, the first Culture album. So if Versace was 2013, that puts them at about 5 years of being a pretty well-known group. Bone Thugs hit in '94, they peaked at '96, and then '97 they dropped Art of War, and they also had their collab with Biggie, Notorious Thug. So Art of War sold a bunch of records. By the way, if we're talking record sales, there's no comparison. People were buying records way more back in the day. Records meaning CDs or any sort of hard copy platform. Bone Thugs was killing it. Even their EP outsold anything that Migos has. Their EP Creeping on a Come Up, before they even dropped East 1999 with First of the Month and Crossroads and all that, Creeping on a Come Up, which featured Thuggish Ruggish Bone, ended up doing triple, quadruple platinum. So if Offset of Migos is talking sales, that's not where you want to go if you're comparing yourself to Bone Thugs-N-Harmony. And again, I'm not going to expand this in this video to talk about all the different groups that could be in contention. We'll do that for a later video because there's several to mention. Tribe Called Quest, Wu-Tang Clan, there's Run DMC. But this is between Migos and Bone. So after dropping the Crossroads, Bone then featured on the Set It Off soundtrack with Days of Our Lives. That was another popular single. And then they dropped Art of War in '97. So there was about a 2-year gap between the first release of East 1999 and Art of War. Now after Art of War, that's where they started to decline, mostly due to inactivity. I mean, Busy dropped his solo album, Heaven's Movie, his first solo album. He's done several since then. Crazy Bone dropped his first solo album, which was Thug Mentality. Both of those solo albums were really good, by the way. Busy's was a very short album. Crazy had a double album, but they were both fire. And they were both more popular releases than the recent solo releases from Migos, Quavo and Takeoff. Offset's about to drop his anytime now. Right now, him and Cardi are doing their thing on social media, having their personal issues in public, and so I don't know how that's going to affect Offset. It's obviously going to make him more famous, but we'll see how it plays out in terms of the popularity of his solo album. But Bone has some label issues with Ruthless Records. Now, keep in mind, Bone was discovered by Eazy-E. There's a story about how that discovery took place. So Eazy-E passed away right before East 1999 dropped in '95. So by the time they hit the height of their popularity, Eazy was gone, and Eazy was like their mentor. Eazy was a lot of things to Bone Thugs, and Eazy was the man. That was about as big a cosign as you could get in the game. The founder of NWA, come on. So Bone Thugs record label, Ruthless Records, was Eazy-E's label that was, managed by Jerry Heller. And when Eazy-E passed, his wife, Tamika Wright, took over the label. Now, the contracts that Bone had signed were not advantageous for owning your music over the long run. And so they were also kind of getting short-ended, which is kind of dicey, because if it's the industry standard, how can you say you're being short-ended if the common practice was to do business in this way? Now, when this started to happen, the only Bone Thug that was making noise about it was Bizzy Bone. He was very vocal about it, and in fact, Bizzy's absence and he kind of boycotted of sorts. When they would do video shoots, Bizzy stopped showing up. He would only feature on so many songs, whereas before he would be on just about all the songs on East 1999. If you look at the Art of War cover in '97, everybody's got war paint on, except for Bizzy Bone. So he obviously didn't make it to that shoot either. So there was a lot going on, and it kind of hurt Bone Thugs as a collective. People were into Bone, and Bizzy was a fan favorite. A lot of people loved Crazy too. A lot of people loved every individual in that group for different reasons. So after Art of War, Bone didn't drop another album for 3 years. In 2000, they returned with BTNH Resurrection, which was a really good album, and it did pretty well. In fact, it was the #2 album on Billboard. So they were still a very popular group. They just weren't as popular as they were 3 years prior. And so they would never recapture that magic that they had between 94 and 97, although they did reemerge without Bizzy in the group, and Bizzy has since been back with the group after 2006, 2007. But in 2007, they dropped Strength and Loyalty, which featured the song I Tried with Akon, and that was a very popular song. It won a couple of awards. It was a top 10 smash. I think it peaked at #6 on the Billboard Hot 100. So Bone has done their things, and like I said, after the height of their popularity, they reemerged and had more success. So if we're talking longevity, we're saying 94 to 97 was the height of their success, although when they did drop in 2000, they were still very popular. And then after 2000, their next couple projects weren't nearly as popular, but then in 2006, 2007, they then recaptured some of the glory with that I Tried single and the Strength and Loyalty album. So if we're talking chart success, Migos has 2 #1 albums, Culture and Culture 2. Bone had 2 #1 albums, East 1999 Eternal and Art of War. We'll see how Migos does with Culture 3, but Bone also had 2 #2 albums. Migos doesn't have that. Now in singles, they both have 1 #1 single, Bad and Bougie for Migos, The Crossroads for Bone, but Bone overall has had more top 10 success. I Tried, that song that I mentioned with Akon, first of the month. So Bone was a big headliner back in the day. They just couldn't keep it together for long enough to capitalize on their popularity because of Bizzy's longtime absence, because of their label issues, and so forth. They could have done way more tours, and it should tell you something about their lasting power and their popularity in that Bone has since come back, and as recently as earlier this year, last year, they've started touring again. There's still a demand for Bone's music, and Bone, more importantly, has had such a cultural impact on the overall game. And if you want to talk generational gap and on the old school hating on the new school, or the new school not paying homage to the old school, when Bone dropped, people were criticizing the hell out of their fast rapping style. We don't even know what the hell they're saying. They're not lyricists. What is this? Some people thought that they were biting Freestyle Fellowship, the underground group from LA. People thought that Bone were record industry plants and they were just a product of the industry, and that their artistry wasn't authentic, and that they were like a flash in the pan. People were letting Bone have it. They had a lot of high profile beefs when they were doing their thing. They started beefing with anybody else who was rapping fast at the time. Crucial Conflict, Do or Die. They had beef with Death Row because of Easy, and then Dr. Dre. So Bone was going through it in their day. Nothing was really spoon fed. I mean, obviously having the Easy cosign and being able to drop singles that are going to be heard by the masses because it was on Ruthless at the time. Thuggish Ruggish Bone ended up being a splash, and you know, the rest is history. But no, Bone was in the trenches. And while you could argue that Migos is playing to bigger audiences, they're also not the main headliner on their tour when they come to Staples Center. Drake was. They were Drake's supporting act on that show. So if it was just a Migos tour, I'm sure it would do incredibly well. But I don't know if it would do nearly as well as they're doing as supporting acts for Drake. Also, hip-hop, rap is much more mainstream than it was even in '95. Now you had Death Row that was killing it, but for a rap act to get that popular was still a very rare thing back in the day, which is why it was such an anomaly when the West Coast hit the way that they did in the G-Funk era. Nowadays, pop is rap and rap is pop. There's really not much differential. Back in the day, in the mid 90s, it was still a bit of a whites only color section thing in terms of the treatment of hip hop. The Grammys would treat it like its own thing, so you wouldn't see rap artists winning the record of the year or the album of the year. Now you have much more of a chance of doing that, though it's still very rare. Rap still isn't treated on equal footing, though it's getting closer and closer and closer. The people who broke a lot of barriers over the years actually had to do more singing than rapping in the projects. Lauryn Hill did it with Miseducation, which really isn't a rap album. Outkast won Album of the Year, but that was largely on the singles Hey Ya and Roses. Also, I Like the Way You Move, the Big Boy one, but mostly Hey Ya is what made Outkast a super pop act. It was also nearly the last we heard of Outkast as a functioning group, aside from the Idlewild soundtrack. Back to Bone and Migos. Bone operated in an era where rap was not pop music. Migos is operating in an era where they are pop. Now the feud between Offset and Lazy hit another level when Offset responded to Lazy saying, "Hey, slow down, y'all talk too much," by clowning Lazy's net worth, basically saying, "Who wants to bet money that this dude doesn't have $1 million?" And there's a lot that goes into that too. Generationally, when blacks are emerging in different industries, look at the NBA. Every generation that follows the last generation has more coaching, is able to learn from the last generation's mistakes financially. So no, I don't expect Drake and Kendrick Lamar to go broke like MC Hammer did. And you could argue MC Hammer was probably the biggest pop rapper of all time. You could make that argument. So if Offset is just taking financial acumen and how you handled your money and how you were able to negotiate with the label and so forth, okay, but let it be known that that's what you're discussing, because that is not what's really being factored in if we're going to talk the greatest or biggest groups of all time. If the financial component is even to be factored in, it's one of several things that should be factored in. But again, if we're talking just straight up record sales and we're talking how people were doing on Billboard, Bone edges them out on Billboard and in overall sales. You look at those Bone albums, East 1999 and Art of War, they were killing it. Several millions of albums sold. Even if you factor in the streaming equivalent, the Culture albums do not stack up to that. And Migos has much more of an opportunity to chart more often on Billboard because of the way the streaming works. When you drop an album, all of the songs are eligible to be streamed and to ascend up the Billboard charts, because every time somebody streams a song, they don't have to purchase the music just to stream it on their Spotify. That serves as a micro purchase. So every X amount of streams equals an album sold. So you could potentially drop an album and have all 12 songs hit the Billboard charts in the singles department on the Hot 100. Back in the day, you had to drop a hard copy of that single for that song to even be considered for the Billboard Hot 100. So East 1999, you couldn't get Mo Murda or Buddha Lovers to chart because those weren't issued out as singles. Nowadays, you don't even need to issue something out as a single for it to chart. So there's also that. So who was the bigger group? I think we'll have to wait and see how much Migos is going to be discussed and played in 5 years, in 10 years. They're hot right now, but I have a hunch that Culture 3 won't even do as well as Culture 2, which didn't do as well as Culture 1. Sometimes those trends are irreversible. Once somebody hits the peak, starts to decline, it's very rare that they're able to get right back on track and hit that peak again. So we'll see what happens, but tune in. A lot of the back and forth is much ado about nothing, and it does make for a lot of good clickbait, but there are some good discussions to be had regarding the success, levels of Migos and Bone Thugs-N-Harmony, and later on we could expand to include other groups to really determine who is the best and what are we basing the best or the biggest on. Until next time, I'm Woog.